Good evening, this is eNCA Moneyline, your money guide. My name is Trudy Makaya. Coming up on the show tonight. New unemployment figures out today. Unemployment has dropped by 1.1 percentage point. Further growth in the mining sector predicted.
And the Minister of Mineral Resources delivers his maiden speech at the mining Indaba. I'll bring you all the details later on in the show. But first, Trudy has your top stories.
The country's unemployment rate is at its lowest level since the end of 2013. StatsSA has released its quarterly labor force survey for the fourth quarter, reporting unemployment down by 1.1 percentage point compared to the third quarter of 2014. But that number means little for those desperate for a job.
Putting together a CV, going for an interview and landing a job, a rewarding experience for many. But for millions of South Africans, this remains a dream. Out of a working population of 35.5 million people, less than half are employed.
The employment to population ratio, which is the absorption rate, it increased in the fourth quarter when we compare with the quarter 3 of 2014. It increased by 0.4 percentage points from 42.6% to 43%.
In total, more than 240,000 people found work in the fourth quarter, mainly in agriculture, construction and trade. Despite the slight decrease in unemployment, about 4.9 million South Africans are still without formal work. The country's unemployment rate now stands at 24.3%. That's less than 1 in every 4 South Africans that do not have a job. 26.6% of women are unemployed, while 22.4% of males in the country are without a job. And with the growing frustration of looking for a job in a difficult economic climate, almost 2.5 million people have given up finding employment. But for those lucky enough to have work, we'll be happy to know that the average time people stay employed has increased from 36 months to 47 months.
From the analysis of the job tenure, we realized that those who are in skilled occupations stayed longer with their employers than those in low-skilled occupations or semi-skilled occupations. And this is the case in mostly all the provinces.
For a very long time, South Africa has been grappling with high unemployment figures. But the latest drop in that number may just provide President Jacob Zuma with some good news to tell in his State of the Nation address on Thursday. Muteo Khwaripe, Pretoria.
Now for a different perspective on the labor numbers, Patrick Craven from the Congress of South African Trade Union is in studio. Thank you, Patrick. Now the numbers, unemployment has fallen to 24.3%, more jobs created in the last quarter. Are you pleased with that figure?
Yes, any reduction in unemployment is good news, particularly of course for those who've found work who didn't previously have it. But of course we have to be a bit cautious. And there are 3 reasons why we should keep the champagne on ice for the moment. 2 of which were given by Kefilwe Masitang at the launch of the figures. The last quarter of any year tends to be the best because there's a lot of seasonal work leading up to the holidays. And some of the sectors where there was an increase clearly reflected that. Farming and retail and wholesale trade. Secondly, the rate of economic growth at the moment is nowhere near enough to sustain that kind of reduction. And it's ominous that on the very day that these statistics were announced, one of the big international banks downgraded its estimate of South Africa's growth to 1.6%, which is way below even the 2.5% which the Minister of Finance was talking about in his medium-term budget speech. Thirdly, and perhaps most important, those figures cover a period before we started load shedding. And nobody really knows what the effect that is going to have on jobs.
Absolutely.
But I think it's a fair estimate that some jobs will be lost, and possibly even more new jobs that might have been created will have been put on hold because employers are worried about the power supply.
And that's a very interesting point that you mentioned, that we can't be too happy and rest on our laurels. We don't know what's coming up going forward. But COSATU is in favor of a national minimum wage. I think the processes have started being underway to discuss a level, perhaps, at which it will be set. But when figures like this come out, showing, that we really haven't moved that much in unemployment, does it give you cause to pause about your stance on the minimum wage?
No, the very opposite. It makes us even more determined. In the same week that we saw these statistics from StatsSA, they published some figures on poverty, which of course are linked to the unemployment situation, showing the incredible figure that more than half of South Africans are living in poverty. And that's why a national minimum wage will start the process of lifting all those people out of poverty, turn them into consumers who will then start spending more money in the shops, which will create more demand for goods, therefore more opportunities for people to produce those goods. It's a myth which economists, I'm sure you often have on this program, keep repeating, that higher wages mean more unemployment. We would say exactly the opposite. One of the main reasons why we have such high levels of unemployment is the number of people who've got virtually no money to spend and therefore are not buying the goods and services which workers could be employed to deliver.
Yet investors all the time, complain about the high wage rates. But I think moving away from that, I think you're arguing that demand would create the jobs that we need. But be that as it may, when you look at the stats, education seems to play the most important role. Those with tertiary education are almost always employed. Isn't that the easy solution rather than going for more radical, riskier propositions?
Well, it's certainly an area where we have to find a solution, but whether it's easy or not, we don't know. COSATU has called for a full investigation into why the money we spend on education is delivering such poor results. Because in previous years, when the State of the Nation or the budget speech has been coming up, we've said we must spend more money on education. This year we've had a second thought. We said, well, what's the point of spending more and more money when other countries who actually spend far less per head on education actually seem to achieve much better results? Clearly there's something wrong with the way that money is being spent or misspent.
And finally, your view on business-labor relations going forward?
Well, they're tricky at the moment. There are various talks going on at NEDLAC on the minimum wage itself, but also on various other labour relations issues concerning collective bargaining, which we're determined to defend and indeed to extend, and the right to strike, which we believe is an absolute constitutional right that workers have, and we will defend that to the very last. Thank
you, Patrick Craven. That was Patrick Craven from COSATU. Thank you so much for your insights. Manufacturing production rose 1.1% in December compared to the same period the year before. This comes after the manufacturing sector fell nearly 2% in November last year. StatsSA says factory output increased by 2.3% between the last 2 months of 2014. The data also shows that 2.5% in the final quarter of the year was another positive boost for the manufacturing sector. The main contributors to the rise range from petroleum and chemical products, basic iron, metal products, and machinery. Increases in manufacturing are expected to be modest as electricity supply remains under pressure. Private equity funds seem to see potential of further growth in the mining sector. A new report shows that they injected over 23 billion rand into mining projects into 2014. At least 50 private equity investments went into mining companies last year. Research from BLP says there's room to increase investment in a market that's starting to build momentum. Half of the money was in 11 acquisitions, with each transactioning averaging 11.3 billion rand. North America took the lion's share of investments, with over 11 billion rand invested in 14 deals. Nearly a quarter of the investments made were into African mining projects, with gold as the most popular commodity for funds. And coming up after the break.
And after the break, I'll be coming to you live from the mining Indaba in Cape Town. You're watching eNCA Moneyline, your money guide. Stay with us.